So I hope the exam went well yesterday. I hope there wasn't any surprises. There's always something, but my original intention was today we would go over the exam. But last night I forgot to post the answer key, and so it's a little pointless until you see what I think is the right answers. It's, you know, there's nothing for you to argue with until you've seen that and thought about that. So I'll post that today, and we'll go over the exam on Thursday, and then I'll send it to the graders on Friday. So you'll have a chance to think about it and, you know, see why I did that. Think about why I did that, said that, but think about how wrong I am, so you can bring your best argument to me about why I'm wrong. And if there's any troubles, we'll deal with it then. Would be there. The other thing I should say is I have like 6 or 8 U cards, which I forgot to bring today, but I will bring on Thursday. So if you forgot your U card at the site, was the case, somebody, I'll bring them in on Thursday. Questions about this? Okay, so where were we? We did the demand for money. The interest rate is just the price of money. It's what you're giving up if you hold your assets in liquid form, in easy to spend form. If you wanted to, you could loan them to somebody, buying a bond, for instance, or just straight out loan them to somebody, and getting the interest rate. But if you want to hold your assets in an easy to spend form in your bank account, you have to give up the interest rate. So just like when you give up money to buy a pair of shoes, you have to give up some other stuff to do that, right? You have to give up buying groceries if you want to buy a pair of shoes. There's a trade-off. What you're giving up when you want to hold your assets in terms of money, something liquid, is the interest rate. So if the interest rate is high, you're giving up a lot in order to hold your wealth in terms of liquid assets, and so you don't hold very many liquid assets. If the interest rate is low, you're not giving up very much, and so you hold a lot of liquid assets. So that's money demand, and it's going to shift whenever anything else changes, right? Because all we graphed was how much money you want to hold versus the price of money, the interest rate. But lots of other things go into how much money you want to hold. So if any of those things change, this curve is going to shift. And the two that are important for us are the price level and your income. If the price level is high, things are expensive, so you need a lot of money to buy them, you will hold more money at any given interest rate. If you have a lot of income, you want to buy a lot of stuff, and therefore you're going to hold a lot of money because money is what makes it easier to buy stuff. Right? So if either the price level or income go up, this curve is going to shift to the right. And if they go down, it's going to shift to the left. At the same level of interest rate, you will now, given that we're now richer, for example, you will now want to hold more money than you did before. And the whole curve is going to shift. Okay. So that's money demand. Now we want to talk about money supply. Do we have it here? What do we have here? Yeah, so we talked about this. If I want to get some money into somebody's hands, I can just sort of toss a euro out on the street, and that person will deposit the euro, and the bank will loan that out, and so more than one person is going to have claims on that same euro. If I put the money, get it to Joe, Joe has a euro in the bank now, but that bank loans it out, and so Carl also has a claim on that euro, a portion of that euro. And so this gives us the money multiplier, that all I have to do, if I want to change the money supply, I don't have to do it the whole amount. I just have to do, if I put in 1, I'm going to get more than 1 out of it. I'll get more than 1 change in the money supply. I'll get the initial amount that I put in, plus they're going to loan it out to somebody. That's going to go into the bank, they're going to loan that out to someone, and so on. So we get a money multiplier very much like the government spending multiplier. If I put a little money into the economy, it turns out that it turns into a lot of money. The banks sort of create money through this process of lending it out. Now, no individual bank is really thinking about that, but the whole banking system as a whole does that. Okay, that's where we were last time. Slightly different from the book version, but not in any important way. Okay, just because I threw the euro down the street, the bank put it in somebody's bank account, and the book put it in someone's bank account. Okay, so now we come to central banks, which is the topic of today's talk. Central banks, from our point of view, are institutions whose job is to control the money supply, to increase the money supply, decrease the money supply, decide how much money is out there. That's their job. And because money means bank balances, right, they're intimately intertwined with the banking system. Because bank balances is money, so the vast majority of money, and so they need to be involved in the banking system. So typically, central banks will also regulate banks. They might not be the only institution that regulates banks, but they're a big institution that's involved in regulating banks so that they can control the money supply. Because banking and money are really the same thing. But their goal here is to control the money supply, but it means that they're involved in banking regulation pretty much off the bat. Okay, so we need our institution, that's its job, to have some way of increasing the money supply and some way of decreasing the money supply. See the insight there. They gotta control it, they gotta make it bigger, they gotta make it smaller. They have to have this power. So we want to see how they go about doing that. So the first thing we do is suppose we want to increase the money supply. We're a central banker, how do we increase the money supply? Well, the first thing they do is they give them the printing press that can print euros. Now, technically, a lot of countries have this separated from the central bank in sort of a technical sense. Like, for example, the US has the treasury that actually physically prints the euros, and the central bank is a different institution. But I think it's easiest as we come at it, for the first place to think of them is actually controlling the number of euros that they can print. Institutions can get messy. Always institutions get messy. Humans get messy. But the easiest way to think about this is think about them having the printing press they can print off euros. So in the sense that they have a printing press they can print off euros, they can increase the money supply really easily, just the way I did, right? I just have to print up a bunch of euros and sort of get it out into the economy. And then people will deposit that in the bank, and people will borrow that, and more than one person will have claims on those same euros. And we'll go through the money multiplier that if I put €1 billion into the economy, it's going to have more than $1 billion effect on the amount of euros in the economy, not amount of money supply, because banking balances count. So I just need to get it into people's hands. So how do I do that? Well, one thing I can do is just like I did, is toss them out down on O'Connell Street. I just toss the euro, toss it down O'Connell Street, someone picks it up, puts it in the bank, and the whole process starts. And that absolutely, totally would work. It would have some side effects. The first side effect is, if I toss a euro down the street, no one freaks out, it's just a euro, right? Even the homeless, they want it, but it's not like a big deal, even to them, right? But the central bank is going to say increase the money supply by 100 billion euros. And so if they take helicopters with big nets and drop 100 billion euros on O'Connell Street, well, first of all, none of you would stay in class because there'd be no teacher because I'd be rushing down to O'Connell Street to get my free money. So we'd all panic and run down there, and we'd trample grandmas and they'd hit us with a cane, and we'd violence babies, and it would be mad, blood everywhere, right? It would not be a good scene. So they don't do it this way. But it is important to notice that they could do it this way. It's just impractical because humans are humans and we would kill each other to grab the money. But this would do the job. Okay? But we need to find some way to do the job that's less disruptive and nuts. So we could, if we wanted to, we could give it to somebody by lottery. We have 100 billion euros. Let's just flip a coin and see who gets it. Someone in Europe's got to get 100 billion euros. And good for them. All of a sudden we have a new billionaire. And that also would work. Now we don't know what he's going to do. It's going to be sort of on his idiosyncratic whims. Like if he's some kind of nutcase and just puts it in a giant pile and never spends it, that's a problem. We wanted to get it out into the economy. And maybe he's like a brain surgeon, and now we've like, I'm not working anymore. Now we've taken him off the market. It's potentially distortionary, but it could work. Like it's feasible. They could have a lottery every month to see who gets the money. Okay. But what they actually do is they go out and they buy something. Okay. And that is sort of the least disruptive thing that they can do to get this 100 billion into the economy. Let's go out and buy something worth 100 billion euros. That goes into the economy, and before you know it, through the miracle of the money multiplier, it's 500 billion extra euros in the economy. Right? So they buy something. But then we have the question, what should they buy? And this is a funny lecture, because back in the day, like, okay, you guys were young. But it seems like yesterday to me. Like in 2005, 2006, I would give this lecture and we'd say, look at all the dumb things they could buy. How isn't that silly? Well, between then and now, they started buying all kinds of stuff, and all that stuff that seemed silly before is sort of general practice now. But let's start with the canonical central bank. What do they buy? They could, of course, go out and buy movie tickets. Right? This would do the job. And the nice thing about this is central bankers would get to see a lot of movies. Because generally speaking, they're increasing the money supply more than they're decreasing the money supply. Because generally speaking, the economy is growing, and so they need to have more money if there's just more goods out there in the world. So generally speaking, day in, day out, they're increasing the money supply, they're printing off euros, and they're seeing a movie. And every day the central bankers say, they all get together, what movie we're going to see today, and they go off to see that movie. Well, that's all well and good, but you can see the problem there right away. How do you buy 100 billion euros worth of movie tickets, and who's going to watch those movies? Right? And so all of a sudden you're buying out all the theaters, and then pretty soon Hollywood gets wind of this and say, well, you know who's going to see movies in Europe? Central bankers. What kind of movies do central bankers like to see? And so we would get movies just targeting central bankers, and the rest of us would be out of luck because they're the ones buying all the movie tickets. We don't even get to see the movies. And you can see this is distortionary. This is going to change the kind of movies that we get. It's going to change whether we can go to the theater or not. It's going to really screw up the movie industry. Right? And so they don't do it this way, but they could. Right? They could just buy movie tickets. That would do it. They get a movie ticket. The movie theater gets the euros, they put it in their bank, and the whole money multiply works. But they got the euros in their hand that they printed on the printing press. All they're trying to do is get them into the hands of normal people. Right? And buying movie tickets would do that. It's just so nuts because it screws up the economy. It distorts everything towards movie theaters and movies that central bankers like, and none of us can get into the movie theater and all that. So that's a problem, but it would actually work. They could, if they wanted to, buy real estate, and this is where, back in the old days, this is so silly. But in fact, they do this quite a lot now, buy real estate. And this would do the same thing. They buy a building, then they take the building, the person who sold the building gets the cash, they put it in their bank, money multiplier, we have more money in the economy. Works just fine. The reason that back in the day we said this was silly is because this is also distortionary, right? All of a sudden, you're buying up buildings, and by and large, you're going to be buying buildings every month, because by and large, you're going to be increasing the money supply every month, and so you're going to buy more buildings and more buildings and more buildings and more buildings, and eventually, the central bank is going to be owning all the buildings, right? And so it would work, it would get money into the economy, but again, we have central bank as the landlord for all of us in the end, if they're doing that day in and day out. That can't be quite right. And then from the central banker's point of view, right, they got trained as economists and lawyers and stuff, and they were all proud of that, but all of a sudden now they have to fix everyone's toilets because they're the landlord. And so that's kind of I don't know if it's a step down, but it's not a career path that they had in mind when they went into central banking, the toilet fixing. And so they want us to keep out of this as much as possible. Now, this actually has become a thing that they do actually buy real estate, and it increases the money supply just as you thought, just as we said, but it's being done because they want the distortion. The distortion is something they want. For example, they have identified these large holding companies that they say are systemic to the economy, and if these companies go down, that's going to be a problem for everybody, like these payments processors and these large things that are interconnected with all kinds of different businesses. So if that business goes down, it's a real problem for everybody. And then they said, well, those guys, we need to prop up those guys. And so those guys have a lot of, for example, shopping malls. Like people aren't going to shopping malls the way they used to, so there's a lot of dead shopping malls out there. And so as we're buying something, we can deliberately distort the economy by buying up those shopping malls. We're getting the money into the economy, which is our main goal. By buying something, they have the money, we have the something. Now the central bank owns shopping malls. It does. God help us. The central bank owns shopping malls that are not performing, and the money is in the economy. And that helps prop up those companies that had these shopping malls that weren't doing well. Is it a good idea? Is it a bad idea? It's a bad idea. But that's my opinion. Other people clearly have other opinions. But it works. It gets the money into the economy. And in that case, the distortion is part of the goal. Right? Now, we couldn't be doing it for all the increases in money supply. We couldn't be doing it indefinitely because, again, the central bank would end up owning all the real estate in Europe. But a few times here and there, it works. Right? We could buy stocks. We could buy ownership of companies. Right? Stock is just a certificate saying that you own part of a company. Yeah, own them. They are yours. They are your company. You are the owner of that company. And you could buy those. You could buy those stocks, and that would get the people who used to have the stocks now have the cash. And so they have more euros, and the central bank has the stocks. You could do this, but it sort of seems less distortionary because it's paper stuff, or switching paper for paper. But in the end, what this would mean is that the central bank would end up owning all of the companies, all of the large companies, in the end, because they're buying stuff year in, year out. In any event, they would end up being a very large shareholder. They would be very large owners of companies, which has this problem like, we're just trying to increase the money supply for whatever our reason. We're playing around with the interest rate, for instance. We're just trying to change things, get us out of a recession, and so we're buying up these things, trying to increase the money supply. But before you know it, the central bank, which is basically the government, the institution is varied country by country, but it's basically the government ends up owning a whole lot of companies. Right? So all of a sudden, we have decided, without even looking, to become a communist country, right? Where the government owns the means of production. We weren't planning on that. That wasn't our goal. Maybe we want to become a communist country, but that wasn't our plan here. It was just a byproduct of buying up all these companies. Now the central bank owns the companies. The government owns the companies. Yeah, that's what it is, right? And Milton Friedman was one of the great economists of the 20th century, in the 50s, 60s, into the 70s. He was big into this, a libertarian guy. He has actually great talks. I don't agree with him, but maybe you do. It has great talks on the road to serfdom, how this kind of thing is going to lead us all to being wage slaves and stuff. Yeah, so he would be very much against this. Right? If you buy stocks, that is the way you have government control of industry. It's not long-term good. Right? Or at least it's a byproduct that we don't necessarily want, whatever your point of view on government ownership of companies is. That wasn't the goal. Right? So we don't buy stocks. And so what we buy in practice is government bonds. And this is also distortionary. It's not like it's not distortionary, but it's the least distortionary thing that we can come up with. Government bonds is just the government borrowing money. Right? So the government goes out and they borrow money from people like you and me, but mostly insurance companies and pension funds and stuff like that. And they go out, and the way they do that is they say, I have this slip of paper that says I will pay you 10,000 euros in a year. And someone goes and pays them for that slip of paper. Say they pay them 9,000 euros to get that. And in a year, the government's going to pay them 1,000 euros. So what the government is doing there is borrowing 9,000 euros if someone pays them 9,000 euros for this. And then in a year, it has to pay that back, and it has to pay that back with interest. But the thing about these bonds is you can switch them around. Right? An insurance company can buy the bond from the government, and then 6 months later, it can sell it to someone like you or me or some pension fund or something. And then the government owes that person the money. So what the central bank can do is they can go out and they're just trying to buy something so the money goes into the economy. Right? They can go out and buy these bonds from an insurance company, not directly from the government, but from an insurance company who had them for 6 months and now wants to get rid of them. Buy it from that insurance company. The insurance company now has 10,000 euros more or less, and they've got this bond, which means the government owes the central bank money. But you know, the government and the central bank, they're not really distinct. In some countries, they are literally the same. In some countries, they're a little separated, but they're very, it's a legal fiction that they're different, even in the most. And so the government ends up owing money to itself. It pays itself back, That ends up being seniorage revenue, and we're good to go. So that's what they do. This distorts the bond market a little bit because the central bank is a large buyer of government bonds. And so that changes the interest rates on government bonds, but that's largely what the central bank is trying to do when it's increasing the money supply anyway, is change the interest rate. And so that's a distortion they're kind of happy with. So the vast majority of increases in the money supply are purchases of government bonds. Now, Europe, in the last 10 years or so, has decided that they are also going to buy corporate bonds. So European corporations who have borrowed money, and they're going to buy up some of those. And this is more distortionary, right? Because you're helping out particular firms by buying up their debt. There's two arguments for this. One argument is the argument that the central bank makes, and that argument is, what we're really trying to do is not increase the money supply. What we're really trying to do is affect the economy. And this is true, right? They're trying to, for example, we're in a recession, we want to increase output. This is our goal. Well, how do we do this? Well, we're going to go through a series, we're going to buy government bonds, we're going to buy something that's going to put money into the economy. We're hoping that that lowers the interest rate, and we'll see how. Right. Lowers the interest rate, and then we're thinking, now that the interest rate is lower, firms are going to invest more because they can borrow easy. Right. And so if they invest more, that goes into I, and the planned aggregate expenditure shifts out. Right. So that's the goal. It's a whole chain of things. We increase the money supply. That changes the interest rate. The interest rate affects investment. That affects output. Right. It's a chain of things that they're hoping to happen. And the central bank's argument is that sometimes all those steps don't work right. You might be able to, for example, lower interest rate. That doesn't mean that a firm is going to invest more. Right? So I'm trying to affect output, but I have to go through this chain of stuff. And so they're thinking, if I bypass some of the steps in that change through this distortionary way of doing it, I can maybe get this thing to work. And so if I target particular companies' particular companies' bonds, that really does make the cost of borrowing for that company cheaper, right? Because someone's buying up their debt, right? And so if I target those particular companies that are maybe having trouble, maybe when I lower the interest rates in general, it doesn't affect that particular company. But if I target that particular company's bonds, it will lower the interest rate for them, and they'll start investing. So here again, the distortion is the goal. My more cynical view is that, again, they've identified some companies as sort of key to the economy, that they're interlocked with everybody and they're doing badly, and they're trying to help out those particular companies. Not evil either, but it's like if you were the company's competitor, you might be a little pissed, right? If they're buying up your competitors' bonds, buying up their debt but not buying up your debt, it might annoy you a bit. But the point here is that we just have to buy something. And in the olden days, the goal was to be as least distortionary as possible so you don't screw up the economy in other ways other than changing the money supply. And they did this by buying government bonds. These days, central banks are a little bit more inclined to distort things on purpose by buying other stuff that they hope are going to distort things in the way that they want them to happen. Okay? Either corporate bonds or corporate assets of other types, real estate, that kind of thing. So that's the sort of new trend in central banking for the last 10 years or so. The important thing for us is that they need to buy something. Right? We want to get money into the economy. If we drop it by helicopter, people panic, grannies beat us up on the street. It's not good. It's embarrassing, first of all, and also I get no money. So that's sad. And so we don't drop it by helicopter. What we do is buy something. And generally we buy things that are as least distortionary as possible, unless distortion is part of the goal. Right? And so typically we're going to buy government bonds. And for the remainder of this class, we're going to talk in terms of government bonds, that they're buying government bonds. That is still the vast majority of what they do, but they also do these other things these days. But again, it's the effect is the same. They could buy anything. They could go out and they could buy massages at massage parlors. You got all the central bankers getting massages, and that would be great. That money would go into the economy. It doesn't matter what they buy. The fact is that if they buy something, that money goes into the economy and gets circulated around. So the important thing is buying something. And what we normally buy is government bonds. Okay. So this is called an open market purchase. And we're gonna stick with open market purchases and sales for the remainder of this. We're not gonna worry about these distortionary things so much, but be aware that that's happening. It's the new trend in central banking. It's called an open market purchase because, and this is gonna be an insight to you, they are purchasing something. I know. Can you believe it? They're purchasing something, they're purchasing these government bonds. And when they purchase a bond, they give somebody money for it, and that money goes into the economy. So the goal here is not the purchase, the goal is the giving the money. And we're trying to give the money to somebody in a way that doesn't cause riots in the street. And so we buy something that's the least sort of riot-inducing kind of thing that we could do. We buy something, we buy government bonds because that screws up things the least. And we buy them on the open market. And this open market phrase is important because we're not buying this debt from the government. It's the government owes people money, insurance companies, pension funds mostly. They owe people a lot of money. And then we go and we don't buy debt from the government, we buy it from those insurance companies. So the government's not involved in this transaction at all. They already owe the money, and it's just who they're going to have to pay it back to. And so they used to have to pay it back to you. I'm the central bank. I come and buy that debt from you. Now the government has to pay me instead of you. And so we're buying this from the open market. Government is not involved in any way in this transaction. Because the debt that they issued, these bonds, are transferable. Anyone can hold a certificate. Whoever holds a certificate, that's who the government owes money to. So they buy it up in the open market. This causes some people trouble. Now you're buying government bonds, it really feels like the government's involved in this, but in fact they're not. And so this sort of spending a second to say this open market purchase, the open market part is important. That the government can't really stop this. The government doesn't get a say in this. And sort of the modern, and by modern I mean post-World War II, thought about how central banks work is that they really should be as separated from government as reasonably possible in terms of decision making. One of the issues going on now is that Trump is trying to fire central bank people in the central bank. He wants interest rates low, central bank thinks interest rates should be high, and so he's trying to fire the people that want the interest rates high. Right? And the theory and practice and laws around this have been for most of the world, most of the normally performing economies have been that those decision-making processes should be separate. Why? Because of Germany between the wars. When the government needs money, they're going to tend to print a lot of money. It can cause hyperinflation. If we separate those powers, the decision-making power about money from the decision-making power about spending, then maybe we won't get this hyperinflation because the central bankers won't print money whenever the government wants it. So this is the sort of the basic reason why we have them as separate decision-making power. And in fact, Trump saying I want low interest rates is really another way of saying I want more money in the economy. And so it really is an inflationary thing. Haven't gotten there, but it will. So it's really that issue. So the important thing here is that, first of all, we're purchasing something. We're purchasing, in principle, anything, in practice, government bonds. And we're doing it on the open market. The government has no say in this. They're not involved in this transaction in any way. They already owe the money. It's just who they're going to pay back. Okay. And of course, if we buy 100 billion, the total effect is going to be much larger than 100 billion because of the money multiplier. Okay. Now, if we get to reality and stop my little thing to make it easy to understand, in practice, they don't really need this printing press because they're in charge of the banking system as well. But remember, they were regulating the banking system, and so they can directly inject money into people's bank accounts without any physical money existing. They have that legal authority. And so they don't actually need to print the notes. I've always been telling the story in terms of printing notes because that's a nice, clean story that we can physically sort of get behind. But in fact, they don't tend to do that. They tend to inject it directly into the central bank, which again is why we had a different money multiplier than the book, because the book was being being careful about this, and I'm never careful, never careful. And I think it is just, it's more intuitive to think about the printing money and spending it. It's not a super important distinction. Okay, the other thing we need to be able to do is we need to be able to decrease the money supply. And this is actually a bit trickier, right? Because if we want to decrease the money supply, we need to get people to give up the money that they've got. Right? They're holding money at the moment, we need to get them to give it up. And you may have noticed that people are much more eager to accept money than they are to give up money. I don't know if your travels amongst the human beings are similar to mine, but that's something I've noticed when I've been out there. People are very reluctant to give up their money. They're not so reluctant to accept money from other people, right? So this could be tricky. So how can we do it? So how do we get the money out of people's hands? The printing press doesn't help us now, right? Because before we could just print out the euros and spend them, but now we have to get someone to give up their money. So one thing we could do is we could point a gun at them and say, give me all your money. And that, in fact, would work. I mean, it seems silly, like, who's going to be scared of a central banker? Have you seen those guys? They look like, I'm just saying, that's actually not all of them. But, I mean, central bankers, come on. Like, they studied a lot of calculus in college, like, who's going to be scared of them, honestly? But it seems silly, but in fact, that's how we do a lot of things, right? That is, for example, how we do taxes. They say, every year you should pay your taxes. You owe us 5,000 euros, and we all show up. And why do we show up and give them the 5,000 euros? It's not like anyone with a gun came to our door, but we do know that if we don't pay our taxes, eventually a couple of nice accountants are going to come by and they're going to say, you really need to pay your taxes. And we'll say, haha, I'm not paying my taxes. And those nice accountants will go away. And then some guards will come to our door and they'll say, you really need to pay your taxes. They don't have guns. But eventually they'll go away as well. But then the guards will come and they'll be taking us away in handcuffs, and if we resist that, then the guys with guns will come. Right, so taxes, even though we don't see it in our daily life, really is, they're taking the money at gunpoint. Like if we don't give them the money, they will eventually come with guns and take us away. And so, now, as a society, we don't like this. I don't know, maybe you like it. I don't know how you live your life, what kind of BDSM kind of stuff you're into. But if you like paying taxes, good for you. Like, you do you. But most people are not so happy with the paying of the taxes. But we kind of suffer through it. And we kind of suffer through this whole gunpoint thing because it's kind of awful. On the other hand, in our heart of hearts, in our dark little secret self, we realize it is kind of nice that there's a fire department, and it's kind of nice that the nurses get paid. And so, as a society, yeah, someone's got to pay for that. And so, we're kind of all on board with having a society, more or less. It's not perfect, but it's better than the alternative. And so, we accept that, yeah, we have to pay our taxes. And to make that happen, there has to be the guys with the guns lurking in the background somewhere. Otherwise, it's not going to work. Right? And so we're okay with it. We're not thrilled, but we're okay with it as a society. We're willing to accept that kind of impingement on our freedoms just so that we have a society that more or less works. And, when we break our leg, there's somebody there at the A&E to take care of us. And all that's good, and we understand that someone has to pay for that. But we're not in that world now. We're in the central banker world. Right? And there's somebody who went to some fancy school. He went to the Sorbonne, and he got some kind of degree, and he knew all the right people, and whoop, he's head of the central bank, and he's kind of a smug jerk. They all are, they are. And he's and he just decides one day, apropos of nothing, I'm going to decrease the money supply. You owe us 5,000 euros or we shoot you. Right? We're not as on board with that. Right? Who the hell is this guy, and how can he get to decide that we have to pay out, right? And so this is not gonna fly. Right? It works for taxes because we are largely as a society on board with taxes. Hate them, but necessary. We are not as a society on board with central bankers on a whim taking money from us. Right? And so this is definitely not gonna fly. They could though, but they have other tricks because they are in charge of the banking system, largely. Right? And so they could just take the money out of our banking account. They don't even need guns. And this would totally work. Totally work. You just wake up one morning and half of the money in your bank account is gone. You say, we needed to decrease the money supply. You're welcome. It would work, but it would work once. Right? It would work once, and then nobody would put money in the banking system ever again, because remember that night when they took half of it? Let's not live through that again. Right? And so all of a sudden, all the banks would close. Right? Everyone would take their money out of the bank. Fool me once, right? But so they could do this. Like, this is totally doable once. It's not doable over and over again. So, we'll just get rid of the banking system. It's fine. Well, first of all, we want to be able to do this over and over again. So this is a problem. But also the banking system is like problematic in so many ways, but really, really, really useful. And so while we're here, let's talk a little bit about why we care about the banking system so very, very much. And the thing about the banking system is it aggregates a whole bunch of money into usable amounts. So, suppose you have this great idea to start a restaurant. It's going to be great. It's going to be IHOP in the central of Dublin. I think IHOP would make so much money in Ireland. Anyway, I put IHOP in the center of Dublin, and I'm going to be rich, right? Well, how much does it cost to start one of these restaurants? Roughly 2 million euros. So I need 2 million euros. You look in your bank account, and you got 50 euros in there. Well, you're not starting a restaurant, right? It's just not a thing that you can do. You're so far away from the amount of money that you need. And so what you do is you have your money in the bank account. And so what the bank does is it gets all these little 50 euros, and a whole bunch of money, a whole bunch of people put in 50 euros, and pretty soon it's got 20 million euros in the bank. Right? A whole bunch of little individual people put in a little bit, all of a sudden it turns into usable amounts. And so then, of course, they make their money by loaning this out to somebody. And so they can loan this money out to, for example, you, who have a business idea but don't have cash. They can loan it to you, and this gets you to be able to start this business. Right? And so so if you're a very large corporation, say you're Hewlett Packard or one of these giant corporations, right? You got lots of ways that you can raise money, right? You can issue non-voting stock, and people will buy up that stock. You can issue bonds, saying, issue IOUs and just borrow from insurance companies and normal people and everything. Or you can go to the bank. So you have lots of ways to get money. But if you are a small business entity, let's say you got 100 employees or less, the really only practical way for you to get money is either save it yourself or borrow it from the banks. And the reason the banks can do this is because lots of little people, like us, put lots of little bits of money in there until it aggregated up to a big amount. And then they can fund these business plans. Right? And so what banks do for us, technically they provide liquidity to the business market, but what they're doing is they're pooling all this money to get it into a usable form that we can do big projects or medium-sized projects. And so this is really important for small to medium-sized businesses to have this ability to get funds when they need it, when they need to expand, or they face a downturn, or they need to replace some stuff, or just, they have large accounts receivable, people owe them money, but it's taking them a little while to get it paid back. They can borrow money to get through that time, otherwise they have to go under. Right? And all this stuff is what banks do for us. And they help people buy houses as well, right? This is a thing. So it's a way of pooling all these small amounts of money, and for human scale businesses, like the kind of businesses that you can imagine starting and doing well, or like even pretty established businesses with only like 100 employees or so, this is really the only way for them to get short-term liquidity and to get money out of the market is to go through banks, right? And so if the banking system collapsed, all these small to medium-sized businesses would have a lot of trouble getting funds, and some of them would have just a bad month, unable to get paid back, and that could cost the business. Even though it's a perfectly good, viable business, it could cause the business to go under. So we don't want to collapse the banking system. So this is off the table. But you don't want to just take it out of people's bank accounts. But again, doable. Okay? So they need to get us to part with our money voluntarily. And so what they do is they sell something. They sell something. Here, I've got a knick-knack, have my something. You give them money, right? You get the something, they get the money, and then they burn the money. They honestly burn the money. Big fire. Well, they shred it first. They have incinerators that they power cities on the money that they're burning. It's fine, they can burn it because remember they have the printing press. They can print more. It's not a problem. So they can sell something. What do they sell? They could sell anything. They could sell, of course, massages and just line up all the central bankers out there giving massages to people on the side of the road. Would work, of course. You would get a massage and they would get your money and they burn the money. That's money out of the economy. Totally would work. Small problem, two small problems. One, central bankers end up giving a whole lot of massages because 100 million worth of massages is a lot of massages. And two, nobody wants a massage from a central banker. So that's not going to work. But in principle, they could sell real estate. But again, they're distorting the real estate market. And real estate is a bit of a pain to sell. Right? You say, I have this great building. I'll sell it to you. You'll get the building. I'll take the cash, burn it, and that money will be out of the economy. Would work. But selling a building takes some time. People have to inspect the building. Like it's a whole process. And when they want money out of the economy, they want it out now. So it's slow. It's not going to be practical. They could sell stocks, but of course, what they sell in practice is government bonds, right? Because they're by and large increasing the money supply. So by and large, they're buying government bonds, buying government bonds, buying government bonds. And every so often, they want to decrease the money supply. So every so often, they need to sell some government bonds. So they have a giant stack of government bonds anyway, so they sell the government bonds. So they do what is called, you guessed it, an open market sale. They have all these government bonds and potentially other things. They may have some shopping malls that they had from before. They may have some corporate bonds. They can sell those too. Whatever they don't want, they can sell on the open market. Again, government not involved in this in any way. They're selling this IOU from the government that they have in a giant stack, and they're selling it to somebody else. So now somebody else, the government will owe money not to the central bank, but it will owe money to somebody else, to some insurance company somewhere. And central bank takes the money, that money comes out of the economy, they burn it, no problem, they can print more, and that's your open market sale. Of course, you take 100 million out of the economy, there's going to be a bigger effect than that because you take that out of the economy, they pay you with their bank balances. Now that the bank, okay, let me slow this down. Let's say I sell 100 billion worth of government bonds. 100 billion worth of bonds goes to you. Now the government owes you 100 billion euros, congratulations. And 100 billion in cash comes to me. I got 100 billion cash, I burn it. So now, out of your bank account now has 100 billion less in it, right? And so the bank says, okay, I have this required reserve requirement of 5%, and just out of my reserves, I paid 100 billion. So now I don't have enough reserves, right? Because I took it out of the reserves to pay, to make a payment. So now I have too few reserves. I need to increase my reserves or decrease the amount that I've loaned out. And increasing reserves is hard, so what they do is when people pay them back their loans, they don't reissue that loan. When somebody pays them back the money they owe them, they don't reissue that. And so now there's fewer people with claims on the money. It is just the money multiplier in reverse. Again, it takes some time to work through, but when you take 100 billion out, the effect on the money supply is much larger than 100 billion because of the money multiplier. So, what do I need to be a central bank? I need a big stack of government bonds to start things out. And so I have something to sell in case I want to decrease the money supply. And I need the ability to create money to buy stuff. Okay? So either a printing press or the legal authority to inject money into people's bank accounts and that kind of thing. Okay. That's all I need. Okay, so now we're going to have a money supply curve, and I will draw it like this. It's a little too much. We have the amount of money, and then we have the interest rate. And in this story, I, as the central bank, can just pick the amount of money that's in the economy. And so I don't have to worry about the interest rate. Whatever the interest rate is, the amount of money that's in the economy is however much I pick. And so it's just a vertical line. And I can pick a very low amount of money in the economy and have this as the money supply. I can pick a higher amount of money, have this as the money supply. Pick a really high amount of money and have that as the money supply. I have total control over the money supply just by these open market purchases and sales. Reality always gets a little messy, like how big is the money multiplier, how long does it take to affect and all. But I can just like, as a genuinely practical matter, if we have this much money in the economy and I want to have this much money, I just start printing money and buying stuff. Printing money and buying stuff. And I keep doing that until the money supply gets where I want it. So now we've got a line going up, we've got a line going down, and as you might imagine, economics being the way it is, we're going to put them both together. But when you are studying these things, right, you want to think about, just the way we've done it here, you want to think about what is money demand? Why are we drawing it that way? What causes it to shift? Separate piece of paper, you want to think about what is money supply? Why do we draw it that way? What causes it to shift? And only then put them together. Because they are stories about very different people. So they are fundamentally separate, and we're bringing them together to see how they interact. But as stories, they're separate. So the money demand curve is about people like you and me and corporations deciding we've got so much assets, how much do we want to keep in liquid form, how much do we want to keep in interest-bearing form. And the money supply is just the central bank deciding, it's a good day to have high money supply. Yes, increase the money supply. Totally on a whim. Do it totally on a whim. Now, they're hopefully going to do it with some thought. But in principle, they can pick any money supply they want. And so we're putting together this model saying, if you pick this money supply, what's going to happen? And then we'll think about which money supply they're actually going to want to choose. So we put them together. We got your money supply. We got your money demand. And we got some magic point where they cross. Right? So, if we're up here, we have a very high nominal interest rate, then the amount of money people want to hold is quite small because there are all these great interest-bearing opportunities. They want to might want to loan their wealth out. They don't want to hold it in the bank. And the money supply is really high. And so the banks hold a lot of money and they need to get people to hold it. And so the interest rate comes down, the price of money falls. So the price of money is going to be where the amount of money that people want is equal to the amount of money that's out there in the economy. And so this is going to be our equilibrium interest rate. Just like we had price of shoes. No different at all, except now the difference that we have is that there's an entity that just controls this money supply, can move it left and right on a whim. That's the only real fundamental difference. That we have this institution that can move this around deliberately, whereas in supply and demand for shoes, the supply of shoes was something that a whole bunch of little corporations were all working on together. No one really had control of that. But now we have one organization just in charge of the supply, and they can shift it back and forth as they wish. So, once we have this, we have our fundamental thing, this will be our last slide today, is that if we want to, we can increase the money supply. I don't know that we should, don't know that we want to, but suppose we want to increase the money supply. We increase the money supply, that's going to give us a new equilibrium interest rate that is lower. Right? And so we can increase the money supply, resulting in a lower interest rate. You will see in the press, this is not how it's talked about it at all. What they talk about is the central bank lowered interest rates today. And that gives people the impression that the central bank has somebody deciding on the interest rate and telling everyone what interest rate to charge. That's not what's going on at all. Everyone can charge whatever interest rate they want. What the central bank can do is increase the money supply, causing the interest rate to fall. Now, it's a sort of academic distinction in the sense that either way, like the central bank decided things and the interest rate is now lower, which is why the press talks about it that way. But in fact, they didn't. It's important to realize that they're not telling anyone what interest rate to charge. What they're doing is they're changing conditions in such a way that the interest rate that they choose is something in particular. Now, we'll often talk about it this way because if someone told us the central bank changed the money supply from 1.235 trillion euros to 1.238 trillion euros, that means nothing to you, it means nothing to me, it means nothing to the head of the central bank. It's complete, utter, useless, detailed information because what the central bank cares about is the interest rate. What you and I care about is the interest rate. What matters for the economy is the interest rate. Right, so this number here is kind of irrelevant, but it is actually the tool that they're using to change the interest rate. So in their meetings, they will genuinely say, what interest rate do we want? Well, we want it to fall by 0.5%. And so they'll say, okay, tell the guys to buy up a bunch of bonds. Do some open market purchases, and that will shift out the money supply, and tell them to keep doing it until the interest rates fall by 0.5%. So they really are choosing the interest rate, but it's not something they have control over directly. It's something they have control over indirectly. Okay, I'll leave you here. I will tonight post the answer key, and you should look at it and bring your questions on Thursday.